What changed in your perspective? What changed? Because over the last couple of years, it's been, I'm here, I'm in the soil, I'm in the mud, I want to get it out the mud with my team. What's the point of going to a front runner, a championship contender, and now it's Miami or bust. What changed in your opinion?
I think mortality. I think he got older. He's lost a lot of people around him in the last 3 years. I believe the number is eight. 8 people around him have passed to various things, health related, violence related. And I think a lot of that has disturbed him to a point of like taking stock of his life and knowing that time is fleeting. I think that's a big part of this. And the other thing about this is if Portland was able to land a single player of consequence, he would stay. He's not looking for, I know everyone's like, well, he just wants to go to Miami. I think he's saying if I'm going to leave the place that I don't want to leave, I'm going to go to the one place I want to go to. And I think people can't really reconcile those two things squarely because they don't know him. Because I will tell you flat out, Damian Lillard does not want to leave Portland. I have that on the best authority possible. He does not want to leave, but he feels like the organization is not in a place where he feels like their leading responsibility right now is winning. I think he looks at things and not even angrily. I think he looks at it rationally and goes, they're looking to develop because that's the best thing for them right now. And the best thing for me is not that. Like if you listen to his comments during the exit interviews about him not wanting to play with 19-year-olds, that's the soundbite everybody plays. The one that you need to play is that path is not my path when he's talking about development versus winning. Because that's the important thing. Because if they made a deal, let's say they traded, Anthony Simons, the number 23 pick of this draft for OG Anunoby, we're not having this conversation. Damian Lillard's important and happily important. Because now you've got Dame Shaden or Dame Matisse, OG Jeremy Grant, Yusuf Nurkic. Is it the best team in the league? No. Is it a team that can make some noise in the playoffs? Yeah. It's about and the thing about Dame is you have to remember, Damian Lillard legitimately believed he could win an NBA title with Maurice Harkless and Al-Farouq Amino as his starting forwards. That's not him like blowing smoke. That's how he's wired. Like that's he believes that whoever he's in a foxhole with, he can win with. So if you give him even remotely tangible dudes, he'll believe it 100%. And so the change was the Blazers went young. And any NBA player who's been in the league a decade will tell you young players can't win. It's not a shot at guys. Yeah. There's 3 young players in NBA history, modern NBA history. Magic Johnson, LeBron James, Tim Duncan. Those are the 3 guys who were legitimately impactful winners day one in the NBA. That's the list. And as good as Scoot Henderson is probably going to be, as good as Shaden Sharp is going to be, it is going to be 4 or 5 years before they are impactfully winning basketball games. That's just how this stuff goes.
Danny, I got to ask, what do you think is the reason why it was tough to build a contender for Dame in Portland?
It's really simple. Neil O'Shea refused to. Zach Lowe actually outlined an article today on ESPN. I would say he was basically, I wouldn't say stealing from me, but it was my manifesto, so to speak, as it pertains to what went wrong with the Portland Trailblazers. LaMarcus Aldridge left in free agency in 2015. And from that point on, they looked to kind of reset things. And they thought they were going to be really bad. It turned out Damian Lillard was good enough for basically 41 wins. That's how good he is. The problem is in that time period after drafting Damian Lillard, Neil O'Shea drafted CJ McCollum. And even though Neil technically drafted Damian Lillard, all of the work was done before he got there. Neil O'Shea got the job 3 weeks before the draft. Chad Buchanan was the interim GM in the time being. And they had all but said that Damian Lillard was their guy. And when Neil O'Shea got the job, he was under orders to draft Damian Lillard. So while it goes on his record, not really the guy he drafted, right? But CJ McCollum, he did all the work on. There's there have been notes behind the scenes that Neil Olshey thought CJ McCollum was better than Damian Lillard and refused to trade him. He thought that there was times, I think, where he would have been more apt to trade Damian Lillard than CJ McCollum. There are multiple times that Paul George and Jimmy Butler were available to Portland, and the inability to and James Harden, the inability to include CJ McCollum was prohibitive in those deals. The 2017 draft, when Paul George was available from the Pacers, the Blazers could have gotten Paul George, and Paul George, I know, was amenable to the fact of coming to Portland to play with Damian Lillard. The Blazers were not willing to entertain CJ McCollum in that package. And that kept being kind of the dividing line through and through and through about whether or not the Blazers could move on. And then the other moves on the edges were always incremental. So, a trade for Robin Lopez here that was, that became a 2015 team that was very good. It was like, hey, that's good, but now what? The trading Mason Plumlee for a first-round pick and a disgruntled Yusuf Nurkic. People tend to kind of reanalyze that deal now with hindsight. The Blazers traded Mason Plumlee for the first-round pick, but the price they had to pay was taking Yusuf Nurkic out of Denver, who was incredibly unhappy. So they got a starting center out of the deal, but they kind of lucked into getting that because they were trying to reshuffle the deck a little bit. Then they give up 2 first-round picks for Robert Covington. They blow the 2017 draft. And that, to me, the 2017 draft was the nail in the coffin. And I think, honestly, that was the writing on the wall. Moving up to draft Zach Collins, passing on OG Anunoby, passing on Donovan Mitchell, passing on Jared Allen. I mean, you can do revisionist draft stuff for a lot of people. The 2017 draft buried the Blazers. Absolutely buried them because they got nothing out of it. Unfortunately, Caleb Swanigan, who they took before Josh Hart and Kyle Kuzma, has since passed. He battled some demons with his weight and growing up homeless and around drugs. And, unfortunately, society got him in that vein. But even on the basketball side of things, they missed the pick, which I know it's gross to kind of talk about that and posthumously, but that's the reality of the situation. Zach Collins, who is kind of putting his career together in San Antonio, Neil Olshey billed him, and I'm not kidding, this is his words, a combination of LaMarcus Aldridge, Rasheed Wallace, and Kevin McHale. That was how he billed him. Okay? A guy who had 0 post work was compared to 3 of the best post players in the modern basketball era. Kevin McHale might have the second best post work in NBA history behind Hakeem Olajuwon. And this is a guy who had no back to the basket game. He projected him as a floor stretcher. I believe he hit 12 threes at Gonzaga as a backup.
Crazy.
So you look at all of these forks in the road, they all went wrong. All of them went wrong for Portland because they had a GM that was more about protecting his neck than taking any risk, who every single time when an opportunity to go big came open, he refused to take it. And it just kept kicking the can down the road. And from 2016 on, that's what it was. The infamous line from Neil Olshey following their unceremonious exit in the first round in 2021 against the Nuggets, the short-handed Denver Nuggets. Neil Olshey said the loss of that series, I quote, was not a product of the roster. He essentially blamed all of it on Terry Stotts.
Wow.
Which is absolutely an insane thing to do. No, even if it was true. To throw a coach under a bus like that after all the mistakes that you've made was, that was the beginning of the end for Neil Olshey. Obviously, they started to run it back the next year. He was fired in December of that season, and that's kind of how we got to where we are now, is that the Blazers essentially kickstarted a rebuild then.
And now that you're turning this chapter after what has been a crazy run under, I guess, like a crazy experience, I'll say, not a crazy run, with Damian Lillard as like the face of the franchise and being this marquee talent, now he has to go to Miami, right? That's where he wants to end up because he believes that's where he's going to have the best opportunity to win a championship. And I need to know what the fan heat check is on this feeling. Would you rather see the Blazers get the best possible return for Damian Lillard, or as a fan base, after what Dame has done for the franchise, would you just be happy with him going to Miami and taking whatever Miami has in return?
Portland loves Damian Lillard, and he will always be number one in their hearts. but Portland fans what's best for Portland. So if there's a world where Dame ends up in Miami and Portland gets a return significantly better than what is out there for Miami, that's fine. If Miami's able to put together a 5, 6, 7 team deal where Portland ends up with what they want and Dame ends up at Miami, that's fine. But this whole 1, 2, 3 team deal where Portland gets this poo-poo platter from Miami and maybe another pick, no, I don't. The vast majority of Portland fans are not okay with that because they know what it is to be in this market. Nobody wants to come here on their own. You have to draft them or trade for them. And if you're not able to get the necessary capital out of Damian Lillard, it's going to be a very, very difficult point to keep going from this, even with young guys like Shaedon Sharpe, Anthony Simons, and Scoot Henderson, because they have a lot of the roster still to fill out, and they don't have additional assets beyond this. They aren't the Thunder or the Jazz or a team or the Pelicans where they have this buffet of picks to kind of build from to fill out the rest of the roster where, when the time is right, they can strike. They basically had to rebuild their asset closet following Neil O'Shea's termination because he gave away so much of what they needed to do so, to add guys like Larry Nance Jr., to add Robert Covington, to add Norman Powell in a swap. Those kind of things have kind of drained them of all their necessary capital. So Portland can't just take, a pick in 2028 and a pick in 2030 and maybe rotation level players in Jaime Jaquez and Nikola Jovic, which I don't like the crap on these kids. I really don't. But you're talking about Damian Ollie Lillard Sr., one of the top 75 best players of all time. There's he's older in his contract. I'm like, he just dropped 32-7 on 47, 40, 92. What do you want? He's not slowing down. I know the guy. He's a machine. They was he's injury prone. I'm like, he played through an ab injury for 4 years where he basically played 82 games and 36 a night. He's indestructible. The only games he's missed in the last 2 years is the first injury he ever had was having that surgery and then being shut down by the team. The guy is about as reliable and destructive an offensive player that is if you're looking at offensive players in the last 10 years, it's Kevin Durant, Nikola Jokic, and Harden and him. Those are the 4 guys where you roll the ball out. And it doesn't matter where you are as a hooper or analytics guy. I was looking at the numbers today. Somebody called Dame a chucker. They're like, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was so much more efficient. Dame averaged 1.12 points per possession. That's an insane offense unto himself. 1.12 points per possession by himself is otherworldly. His points per shot was 1.52. If you're doing that, you are quite literally a top 5 offense unto yourself. The current guys in the NBA that do that, Dame, Luka, KD, Giannis isn't even that. Jokic, that's the list. That's how good he is offensively. People are like, oh, he's a bad defender. I'm not going to go to bat for Dame's defense because it's not great, but there hasn't been a playoff series that he's ever played in where he's been hunted. Trae Young, he gets hunted. That kind of thing happens. I've never seen Dame get hunted. So this whole idea of Dame being overpaid or falling off a cliff, worry about that when he's 37. That's still 4 years away. Until then, he's that dude.
Once again, we're talking to Danny Marang, the host of the Danny and Dusty Show on 1080 The Fan out in Portland, and also host of the Jacked Ramses podcast and the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Salute to everybody in the chat. Hit that thumbs up button for you boys. Danny, you talked about Neil O'Shea and the job that he did really tying up the knots of the organization. Now, Joe Cronin is faced with the impossible task of trading Mr. Portland and getting a return that can put the Blazers on a path to building properly for their future. But you mentioned the Miami package and the lack of quality in there. So herein lies the problem, because Dame has said it's Miami or bust. And Joe Cronin saying in order for both sides to get what they want, there needs to be more than one team involved here, either as an option. So, how does Portland get their value? Is there another team that Dame may have on his list? Maybe it's a Brooklyn, or is Portland going to try to seek maybe a multi-team trade to ultimately get what they want?
I think it's one of two things has to happen. It has to be like a 4, 5, 6 team deal where it's going to get nuts, where you get, Harrow goes to San Antonio and Keldon Johnson goes to Cleveland and Cleveland sends Jared Allen to Portland and Portland sends Nurkic. Something like it's going to get weird. Like it's either that or Dame adds 2 more teams to the list. You throw Boston on the list, you throw New Orleans on the list. And I know everybody in Boston's like, they're not including Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown's not going to Portland. To be honest, I don't want Jaylen Brown in Portland. I want Jaylen Brown in Houston. Send Jaylen Brown to Houston. Send Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, and 2 1s to Portland. Call it good. Like those are the kind of things that I'm looking at if I'm Portland. If you can get Dame to say, look, man, I know you don't want to go to Boston. You don't want to live there, whatever the situation is. You're tight with Jason Tatum. You're tight with JT. Go there and go win a title. Go to New Orleans. They'll redirect CJ McCollum somewhere else. It'll be Dame, B.I., Zion, Herb, and Trey Murphy. Go ball out. Have fun there. Like, I think there are other landing spots for him that make sense on the basketball side of things, even if they don't necessarily make sense for him living-wise. Mm-hmm. And I honestly don't think it's the basketball side of things that's hanging things up. I think in Dame's head, he's like, I'm in the place that I want to be in Portland. So if I'm going to leave this place, I'm going to go to the only other place I'd rather live. And I think that's what kind of makes this whole thing work for him as far as that part of it. And he's mentioned in the past that he's, if he wasn't playing in Portland, he'd like to play in LA or Utah. I don't think the Clippers have enough, but if the Clippers got involved and Paul George, ended up in New York, he's a CAA guy, and New York sends part of their stuff, anything not named RJ Barrett, to Portland. No, just so you know, I'm not an RJ guy. not coming here, guys. Nope. I don't want Kentucky guys. I don't want Tyler. I don't want RJ. I don't want Kentucky Duke guys. I don't want either one of them.
Yeah.
That's good. But like if they can find something there, okay. But that's the thing is what's going to be funny is when this does ultimately go down, it's going to be one of 2 paths. There's other teams involved, or it's this super trade where Portland, LA, Philadelphia, Miami, Brooklyn, Boston, like it's a 6-7 team, Utah, teams that have all OKC will get involved because they have 1,000 picks and they can't use them all. And you're just going to get pieces moving everywhere. And that's the part of this is both of those things, either adding more teams to the list or some mega deal, take time. And they're going to take a ton of time to get either of these done.
Well, what do you make of, when I touched down in some league, I kind of set my Twitter network ablaze because when the announcement came out from his agent, from Aaron Goodwin, that said, it's Miami or bust, and he's threatening to sit out. You had so many fans in an uproar. He's selfish. He's this, he's that. He needs to honor his contract and this, that, and the third. And I said, well, look, he gave this organization 11 years of blood, sweat, and tears. 7 all-star appearances. I mean, what more did you want the guy to do? He literally put the franchise on his back. This is a players' league. The teams typically will work with the player to get him where he needs to go. Kevin Durant got to go to where he wanted to go eventually with the Phoenix Suns, even though the Nets got a great, great deal. I'm not saying that Portland should be accepting pennies here, but, I mean, look, this is Damian Lillard. What do you think of the criticism where the fans are saying, well, he should have done this in free agency. If he wanted to go to Miami, why did he sign the 2-year extension with Portland? He should have just done it 2 years ago when he was a free agent or became a free agent and left. What do you make of the criticism of Dame here? People call him selfish for doing this to the Blazers, putting him in a tough spot.
I don't think he's selfish. I have talked to people around him, and I think ultimately they probably should have sat down both sides 2 years ago. It probably would have been better for both parties to allow that kind of divorce to happen earlier. It probably would have been better for both sides. The downside of that is the extension. Like it would have had to be like agree to an extension with a new team kind of situation, which complicates things, certainly. But Damian Lillard is good enough to be like, yeah, you'll give him the extension. You're not going to worry about him, James Harden. Ultimately, again, I think that the organization will work to get him somewhere that's good for him. Whether or not that's Miami, I don't know. They work with CJ McCollum to get him to New Orleans. I'll tell you right now, New Orleans was not his top destination. I know that for a fact. Josh Hart had the Knicks on a list of teams like he'd be willing to go to an extent, because they weren't going to send him somewhere where he was going to go there and then not look to resign. You go back to the Twitter feed. I was sitting there talking about Josh Hart is going to be a Knick 3 weeks before the trade. It was no kidding. It was just a matter of what is Portland getting back? Is it a first in Cam Reddish? Is it a first in Obi Toppin? What is this going to be? And I think they found a trade that made sense for both parties. The Blazers, even if let's say the Blazers stayed older and they walked a more veteran path, they weren't going to pay Josh Hart to be $20 million a year sixth man. When it's all said and done, don't be surprised when Josh Hart gets a 4-year, $80 million deal.
Yeah, I think it's coming.
Yeah.
For him taking care of them, I think it's coming.
I would be stunned if Josh Hart got anything other than a 4-year, $80 million deal.
I think
because I've heard about it for 2 months. So if it's 476, fine. Whatever. We're arguing, haggling over $1 million a year, but Portland wasn't going to pay that to a sixth man when they've got Damian Lillard, they've got Anthony Simons, they've got Jeremy Grant, they've got Yusuf Nurkic. The books just weren't going to line up for that. That's just the way. Jeremy Grant just got a 5-year, $160 million deal. They weren't going to be able to fit that in there. They'd be at the second apron. So they got a first-round pick and a look at Cam Reddish to see if he could be a guy on his third stop. But they got a real first-round pick. With CJ McCollum, they got him to a real spot where he's now happy and he's extended, a good basketball position for him where he was the lead guard. And, they'd made some noise with some injuries and stuff like that. But those teams, they weren't send me to New Orleans, send me to New York. No, they had a list of teams that they were able to work with. That's why I keep saying one of two things is going to happen. It's a mega deal, or Dane puts 2 more teams on the list. And when I was down in Vegas, I was talking to a former front office executive who was actually conducted one of these trades. And what he told me was this, and this was the entire process. The star was a mega star, is a little bit older, but in the same kind of situation where there was a diverging path. And he told me, he goes, look, this is the way I think it needs to go with Dane. That star gave us a list of 3 teams. And we told them, we had this discussion, this back and forth. It was collaborative. And the discussion was, okay, look, if we have an offer on the table from 3 teams and they're all equal, or there's 2 that are equal, the player, you can pick which of these destinations you want to go to. But if there's one offer that is clearly better than the others, we're taking that offer. But you still go to one of the teams you want to go to. In the end, it came down that all the offers were relatively the same. And so he got to choose where he went. He went there, they won, he was happy. The team had draft capital that was worth it to them. They were able to draft a player that was valuable to them. And both teams were amenable. It wasn't like this ugly relationship. I've heard the same situation was true with Kevin Durant. That, everybody knew he wanted to go to the Suns, but the Nets told him flat out what they're offering right now, when Robert Sarver was owning the team, was not, they just couldn't do it. What changed between then and February? The team sold, 4 days before the trade deadline, that Matt Ishbia took control of the team. The second Matt Ishbia took control of the team, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and all the picks became available.
Yeah.
The deal got done. It wasn't that, now we're willing to trade you. It was, no, the deal got better. And I think that's the thing, is everyone in Miami keeps trying to tell people it's a good deal, while the rest of the world is looking at you going, that deal is terrible. Please feel bad about it. There's nothing redemptive about it. And so the deal just needs to get better. However, whether it's the Heat being ingenious with how they move stuff around, or another team valuing pieces there that the Trailblazers don't. And that's not, the onus right now is not falling on the Blazers to do that, because I believe them. They're willing to wait this thing out. And there is a very real possibility that Damian Lillard is on this team to open the season.